Hello, welcome to a very special tribute to the Washington Post, otherwise known as episode 387 of Sree's Sunday New York Times read-along. We will be focusing on the Washington Post, and we have two former staffers who will be joining us to share their thoughts on the mass layoffs that shook anyone who cares about democracy and journalism. Pradnya Joshi, you can follow her on Twitter, PJoshiDC, and Richard Prince, who is a media columnist, but was a one-time copy editor at the Washington Post many, many years ago. But he will have a lot to say about everything going on in the media landscape. My name is Neil Parekh. I'm the executive producer of the show. We are live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, my Instagram, and our Digimentors website. Please like, comment, share, retweet, do all the things you do to help people find the show. Thank you in particular to everyone watching on replay. You're catching the very beginning of the show, and we always appreciate that. We know that Sunday morning is not the best time for a lot of people, much less the Sunday after Valentine's Day. I was telling Sree just yesterday, the next time we do a very special show, because this is different than our usual Sunday morning fare, let's not do it after Valentine's Day when people have plans Saturday evening, or they may be sleeping in on Sunday morning. But again, I want to just mention before we start, our longtime sponsors of the New York Times read-along, Muck Rack, and Muck Rack is a longtime sponsor, and Graphic History Company is a more recent sponsor. So thank you for all of your support. Sree and I have been doing this show for, as you can see in the corner, 10 years. Sree started looking at the New York Times 10 years ago on Facebook, and I joined him about more than 8 years ago. We have looked at other newspapers over this time period: the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Toronto Globe and Mail, the Dallas Morning News. We've looked at the Khaleej Times and the Philadelphia Inquirer, if I didn't mention that. And we've done several WAPO read-alongs as well, including at the home of Mark Fisher several years ago. But today it's a tribute to the Washington Post. Some of you might remember several years ago, we did a tribute, a celebration of the New York Times sports desk. And we had a murderer's row, if you will, of sports columnists and journalists: Lori Mifflin, Claire Smith, George Vesey, and William C. Roden, several of whom I grew up reading and just idolized. This was in 2023 when the New York Times abandoned their sports coverage in favor of the Athletic. Today, we are so pleased to have Richard Prince and Pradnya Joshi join us for this Washington Post tribute. So we will get going in just a moment. We also want to make sure you know this show is produced by Digimentors, the social and digital firm created by Sree Srinivasan and his friend Andrew Lee several years ago. I am proud to be a vice president of events and communications. We do digital marketing shows like this, strategic communications, trainings and workshops, a lot of work around AI. If we can help you with a show or with some consulting, please let us know. We have a number of people who are checking in and watching, and we'll just say a couple of quick hellos before we bring on Sree. Jonathan Borstein, and I'm going to actually amend that, John Borstein, says greetings from the sunny East Village. Doug Levy says good morning from the San Francisco Bay Area. We always like to say it's 5:30 in the morning his time. Thank you, Doug. Patricia Freudenberg offers grace and greetings from New York. Pradnya asked something about sleeping in. I guess I made a comment earlier. Some people are sleeping in the day after Valentine's Day, not us. Let's go Washington Post, says Pradnya. Jay Palaki says hello from DC, here for a bit this morning. Jay, thank you so much. Dr. Tachi says happy Sunday from Fort Lauderdale. My mom says good morning from Tampa. Thank you, Mom, always a loyal viewer. And the last hello I'll give before bringing on Sree is Paula Kiger. Thank you, Paula, for coming back today for this very special episode. For longtime viewers, you'll know Paula was a longtime producer of the show, helping to drop links into Facebook for things that we were talking about. She is returning in that role for today's episode. So thank you, Paula, so much for joining us. With that, we'll bring on our host, Sree Srinivasan. Sree, welcome.
Hi, Neil, and hello to everyone watching. I know we have a lot of new people who are watching us live or later because of the topic today, including a lot of Washington Post alumni. I know that our friend Pradnya Joshi is sharing this with all the folks who she's in touch with. So everyone, please share this. This is such an important topic. And this is also a difficult day to talk about what's happened at the Washington Post. And what I like to do is on the darkest days wear the brightest colors. And so I found the brightest shirt I could to talk about the Washington Post, because with everything that's gone on, we have to remember there are still hundreds of journalists working there, and delivery people and truck drivers. All of these people have to be supported, and we can't just all walk away. A lot of people have, and that'll be one of the things we talk about. Everyone, I'm Sree, that's Neil. We do this Sundays at 8:30 a.m. in Eastern Time, and we've been doing this for a decade. We're newly available as a podcast on both Spotify as well as on Apple Podcasts, and I hope you will check us out. We have a very busy day and lots of things to talk about. I am going to just start by just showing you the headlines from the New York Times just to see what is big. This is yesterday's paper. I always like to check out yesterday's paper and show you the DHS expanding push to identify opponents of ICE is the lead story, and the FAA tussles with military over air rules. That's yesterday's front page of the New York Times. And today's front page also has ICE, I'm sure. It says, this is a big story. Navalny killed with frog toxin, officials report. There's a 2024 death in prison. A joint statement from Europe challenges Russia's account. And protesters say ICE menaced them at home. Stories of intimidation detailed by the ACLU. A point about Putin, I've looked at everything that has happened in the last year, and it would be impossible to pick one thing that the Trump administration has done and say that has not been a positive for Mr. Putin and for Russia. And now we see this confirmation, which a lot of us have suspected, of what happened to Alex Navalny and the opposition there, Very, very sad. Neil, it's important. These are important stories. We will get to them through, I'm sure, some of the Washington Post coverage today, including the papers that both Pradnya as well as Richard have at their hands. And I do want to say I started my morning thinking about a slightly different topic, which is what is going on with the world of AI. And I just finished my newsletter, and it's called, Is It Already Too Late for the AI Whistleblowers? And are they actually whistleblowers? So I asked each of the big platforms, is AI safe? One word only: depends, nuance, debatable, depends, sometimes. And look what Grok said, no. And that Grok is, of course, owned by Mr. Musk. So he's putting his thumb on the scale to make it even worse, as we know. Neil, your thoughts before we talk about the Washington Post?
So I was just going to jump in. Certainly with AI, there's a lot to cover around that. I think the biggest news that I want to spend some time on over the next several weeks is advertising on ChatGPT. I think Claude's ads during the Super Bowl were very effective, and it certainly gives me pause. I like using several of these platforms with the same prompt to compare their answers. And then what I do, Sree, is I compile their answers, put them in one document, and send them back to each platform and say, take the best of each one and tell me why. What did you like? What do you not like? And come up with a better version. So there's some interesting things you can do. But I noticed that ChatGPT really, it wants to be your friend. I mean, the approach that they take is just very interesting. Claude, on the other hand, it just is very straightforward. it's not trying to, it's not giving you any fluff. It's giving you almost like just the facts, which I think is interesting. The other thing I wanted to mention real quick, because you mentioned Trump, is that last night, even though there wasn't a new episode, Pam and I watched an old rerun of Saturday Night Live back from on some other channel that just came up in our viewing. And it was from 2016. It was from the first year of Trump won, when Sean Spicer was at the podium and Melissa McCarthy was there. But the jokes they were making, the comments, we thought it was bad in 2016. We thought every day was another catastrophe. And it literally, Trump too said, yeah, hold my beer, and just like obliterated that record of craziness, which I didn't think it could get worse than that. It certainly did.
And it has gotten worse, and that's part of the problem. And part of it has been what everybody has been kind of thinking about in terms of the tech bros and the tech moguls who have all kind of moved over and been in full support of Trump, which wasn't the case the last time. So just very quickly, in my newsletter, I want to thank everyone who is now a paying member of our newsletter. The core newsletter will always be free, but it allows us to pay folks and do new things. We've introduced a new channel within the newsletter. It's called OK TV, where we review kind of just okay television. Instead of peak television, we're reviewing Netflix slop and things like that. And we start by looking into the Corbyn universe, the Corbynverse, the Harlan Corbynverse. And Harlan Corbyn, the great the writer and the author who has so many Netflix shows, he was a guest on our show, on this very show. You can find the archives during the pandemic. And so thank you for those who make it possible for us to do work like this. It means a lot for us that we can get your support, but you can also support us by just subscribing. Sreenet.substack.com, Sreenet.substack.com, or if you go on LinkedIn, I also have a LinkedIn version of all of this. So thank you very much. Neil, I think we're ready to talk about the Washington Post. We have two terrific guests.
I was going to just remind folks that, in terms of today's show, it's going to be more focused on the Washington Post and the impact on the layoffs, much lighter on the news and the actual paper. It's not going to be so much a review of the coverage of the weekly paper. So just so folks have an understanding of what to expect. But our guests today, again, Pradnya Joshi and Richard Prince, so thrilled to have them on the show with us. And again, our focus is on the mass layoffs that shook anyone who cares about democracy and journalism. I know Pradnya and Richard certainly do. So without further ado, here are Pradnya and Richard.
Hello.
Hi, Sree. Hi, Neil. How are you? Hi, Richard. Good to see you.
Hello.
Thank you for being here. We've all spent time in each other's company in person, but not like this, and certainly not on this occasion. It's a difficult morning, a difficult week, a difficult month at the Washington Post. And both of you have been leaders there and leaders in journalism. And both of you I've admired for decades. And I count you both as my friends. And I'm sorry we're meeting like this today, but we have to meet, we have to talk. As Neil said, this is about the future of the democracy we live in. As has been pointed out, the most important city in the world, Washington, D.C., has no regular newspaper covering it the way it used to or the way it should be. The Washington Post still exists. There's still, Pradnya will tell us how many hundreds of journalists still there, but it's not going to be covered the way it should be. And that is what we are mourning. And we are going to celebrate the great work Pradnya and so many others have done there. And I'd like to start by asking each of them to kind of give us their thoughts about where things stand today. And we'll start with Pradnya Joshi, the former national weekend editor of the Washington Post. She could never do the show with me because every weekend she has been working. And she's spending one of her first weekends not doing that with us. So thank you so much, Pradnya. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Sree. It's been, I think I've known you for most of my career. It's been, I've been in the industry about more than 30 years, actually. So it's been quite a ride, and I have been through numerous layoffs, cutbacks, early retirement packages, but this one just seems to have hit a little harder. I think it's because the scope of it. Some people said it's the biggest layoff of journalists in recent times. There have been different ways of trying to compare. I suppose the closest I could think of was in 1995, which was like the beginning of my career when New York Newsday closed and a bunch of other newspapers closed at the time. I was working at the Milwaukee Journal, and the Milwaukee Journal and the Milwaukee Sentinel merged. And that was quite traumatic, especially because I was just a year out. And in a sense, they didn't quite cut the newspapers in half, but when we merged the two papers, it was kind of how many people do we take from this business desk? How many people do we take from that sports desk? And and I guess in a sense, they tried to make it even because they appointed the executive editor from the Milwaukee Journal, but the managing editor from the Milwaukee Sentinel, and so they tried to do some, evenness about it. Yeah, those are very tough. There were, that year was also, like I said, the year New York Newsday closed, and that was my second employer, Newsday writ large, and I was started out on Long Island covering business news there. And then later they decided to re-expand to New York. They didn't quite do New York Newsday, but they called it Newsday New York edition. They always had a Queens edition, but they decided after the Chicago Tribune brought them that they wanted to have a presence in the three major cities, New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. The Chicago Tribune also owns the Los Angeles Times. So, I moved to the city and I covered Wall Street. And then, of course, 9/11 happened, and New York City became a major story for the region. And I was there until 2005 when, again, another set of cutbacks were going through because there was a scandal involving the newspaper because of the circulation has been inflated by the business side. So I didn't actually get laid off, but at the time I, sort of saw that maybe I need to try to do something else, and I decided to become an editor. I eventually took the editing test at the New York Times. I started out as copy editor at the New York Times, worked my way up to assistant business editor, and we decided to move our family to Washington, D.C. So first I worked at Politico, and then I worked at the Washington Post when it decided to expand in 2002 again, 2022 again, because Marty Baron had done a wonderful job, and the paper was thriving, and they wanted new editors. They hired 40 new editors, and I was one of the editors. I was very surprised that they didn't have a weekend editor for a national and for any of the desks. I mean, at the New York Times, the weekend editors went way back, and it was sort of written into the DNA of the New York Times. So I was very surprised that the Washington Post didn't. People had just sort of done ad hoc ways of doing weekend news. So I got to really invent the job of weekend editor of the national and politics desk. Probably at its height, there were 150 people on the national and politics desk. I wouldn't know the head count right now, but there were cutbacks even in politics coverage. Since I was one of the people who was cut back, probably about 15 or 20 other politics reporters and editors were also cut. But here, I think it's been a lot more traumatic because the whole sports section has basically been eliminated and will be folded into the feature section. So they're keeping about 4 or 5 sports reporters, I think, and I'm not even sure how many editors they're going to keep, but they'll be writing features type stories. and they cut so many of our bureaus in all around the world. So I think that's really the loss also that we're feeling, the loss of a lot of global coverage. Ukraine bureau chief was out on the field when she got the notification that her position had been eliminated. Nobody really knew. I think we'd heard rumors that there were going to be layoffs. Again, like I said, for 30 years I'd been through this, and I thought there's always a chance that my position will be laid off. And but again, the breadth and the scale of it was very surprising to everybody. And yes, go ahead.
Sorry, just to jump in. What about the impact on diversity at the Post? The Washington Post News Guild shared some stats. 50% of Hispanic Latino guild members were laid off. 45% of Black guild members. 43% of Asian guild members. They also have 37% of white guild members laid off.
Right.
Can you speak to that as well?
Yes, that's actually been very concerning to people in the newsroom, as well as even I think Matt Murray had addressed it at a town hall, even though there was a town hall to try to, renew and revigor the spirit last week of the people who were left. And he said that was one of the things that he was, discouraged, that there was so many cuts to diversity after so much progress had been made. Why don't we throw it to Richard, because he actually has been watching this for many years, and I think he could probably speak a lot to how it's changed. But Washington D.C. is a Black majority city, and losing so many African American, Hispanic Spanish speaking reporters and Hispanic reporters at a time when immigration and issues like Venezuela are such a big thing. He probably has a really good perspective on that.
Of course. Richard, thank you again for joining us. I wanted to just clarify before we jump into that. You've been a media critic and columnist for a number of years, but you were at the Washington Post many years ago, correct? Was a copy editor, or?
Well, let me explain. I was at the Washington Post twice. The first time was as a reporter from 1968 to 1977. And I covered local news, the city hall, and education. But also, I think one of the most significant things of my tenure there then was that I was part of a group called the Metro 7, who were 7 Metro reporters who were Black, who took the Post before the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, charging that they discriminated in jobs and promotions. That was a major step for people of color in journalism, because other news organizations followed, and people at other news organizations followed, that is. And there was suits at the New York Times, Daily News, Newsweek, et cetera, et cetera. So that has framed my perspective on the Washington Post. I returned in 1999 to work on the foreign news desk as a copy editor, part-time, and was there until 2008. So this is about diversity at the Post and elsewhere has sort of tempered my appreciation for the Washington Post. We wanted the Washington Post to be the best version of itself, as you have seen now from the figures you just spoke about of the people who were laid off in not just the news department but also the commercial side. The Post is not living up to the best version of itself, and just a few months ago, they met with the Post met with the National Association of Black Journalists and the local chapter of the Washington Association to question why so many leading Black journalists were leaving, and what does that mean for the Post coverage of these vital issues. They pledged, of course, that they were going to do their best and everything, but since then things have only gotten worse. And again, referring to the figures you just mentioned. So as a result, when the Guild had a rally in front of the Post right after the announcement, there were very few Black people or Hispanic people outside at the rally. I don't think they feel the connection to the Post that they might have felt otherwise. So that's another, this is we're tempering that. The black columnists are gone. They have tried some things. For example, in today's paper, they have a front page story about Don Lemon, very lengthy piece. Lemon bigger than ever after his arrest and Trump attacks. Very good. They have also a story in the style section about the closure of the Richmond Free Press, which was a black weekly in Richmond, Virginia. And it's a well-done story, except they left out one major point, which is when they mentioned the fact that they lost advertising, they didn't give the reason why they're losing advertising, which is the attack on DEI. And we just had I just went to another meeting a few weeks ago in which the president of the Black Press Association, which is called the National Newspaper Publishers Association, said the black press had lost $8 million in the last year because of advertising losses, all due to the fact that advertisers are afraid to be associated with people of color financially for fear of the Trump administration. So now that is significant because if the reporters there were really conscious of what's going on in that world, they would have picked that up instantly. And that's why I say that my response has to be tempered in terms of the Post. They used to have a managing editor who was tasked with the charge of diversity. She's gone. Jason Murray, who then became the highest ranking black editor as sports editor, he's leaving as soon as the Winter Olympics are leaving. And so Matt Murray may be sorry that this has happened that way, but I mean, he's responsible. He calls the shots. And I like Matt Murray. He came to we have a monthly gathering of reporters and journalists called the Journalism's Roundtable. And when he was first named, he mentioned diversity as one of his top priorities. But where has that led us? It's led us to this point where, as I say, you have a rally to support the Post, and very few black people are there because they don't feel that connection. You have, Hispanic people and black people at the top of the list in terms of who gets laid off. So I like the Washington Post because it has great standards that I, as a young reporter, learned and inculcated. And they have the wherewithal to do a lot of things that a lot of other papers don't. But they're not the best Washington Post that they could be, and so that's why I say my tribute is tempered.
I would also.
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead, Pradnya.
I was just also going to say, as in a way of tribute, you were probably there when the great Milton Coleman was managing editor, and we also had Kevin
He was
Merida,
deputy
managing editor.
Yeah,
sorry,
in
Kevin
those days,
Merida.
no black person could become managing editor. Go ahead.
But he I felt like he very much represented the Post at the time. Was he that title when Marion Barry was president? Mayor.
He was mayor.
Yeah, at the time. Yeah, so I felt like there was no sense that the Washington Post was going to be easy on Marion Barry just because
That's fine.
Yeah, exactly. They were just going to be just as tough. And when Kevin Merida was managing editor, he was also at the time he was supposed to have been rumored to possibly succeed Marty Baron, but somehow he fell out of the race, and I'm not exactly sure what happened there. But and also in the last round of early retirements, we lost some deputy managing editors. One of my favorites was Monica Norton. She and I both worked at Newsday, and she was deputy managing editor, and she was one of the best and even headed editors at the time. She was not as high ranking as Krisha Thompson, but we have lost even in more recent years some great managing editors. Deputy managing editors and other high ranking editors. So.
Thank you to both of you for framing this in such an important way. We're not here to sing the praises of the Washington Post, but we're paying tribute to what it was till recent years or recent days even, but acknowledging that no paper is perfect. And I liked Richard's idea that we want the Post, as we want all good journalism organizations, to be the best that they can be, and very few of them live up to it. Nobody, and certainly not the New York Times on a daily basis. So we're very clear on that, folks. I'm Sree Srinivasan. Neil Parekh is going to join us back in a minute. That's Pradnya Joshi, former national weekend editor of the Washington Post, and that's Richard Prince, two-time Washington Post staffer, who is now much better known as the host of Journalisms, his newsletter that everyone should subscribe to. And Richard will tell us how they can do that. And it's a daily way to understand what's going on in the media. And he brings his perspective and does a lot of work helping people of color, journalists of color, understand the media world, and non-journalists as well. But I want to react to a couple of things and also say hello to all the folks who are watching. There's so many people putting their comments, so we want to bring them on in just their comments on in just a moment. But I do want to frame who the players are here. We mentioned Marty Baron, who you heard his name. You also heard the name Jeff Bezos, of course, who owns the paper, who bought the paper for $250 million in 2013. I wrote about it back then thinking this is a good thing that he can actually help. This is when Mr. Bezos hadn't gone off the rails in any, he had a lot of issues even then, right? We know Amazon doesn't treat its workers well. The way in which he was operating his businesses wasn't what we wanted, but at least with the Post, he promised to be hands-off, and I think he was in the early years and did invest. Another player in this entire thing, and so Marty Baron was the editor of the paper and was played by Liev Schreiber in Oscar-nominated, Oscar-winning film. He was part of this back in, I think, his Boston Globe days, and then he was brought to the Post and had a very good run, Pulitzer Prize winning run, multiple Pulitzers. And then another name we mentioned was Matt Murray, and we also mentioned the name Will Lewis. And so let me talk about those two folks for just a moment. I'm going to do that by showing you my newsletter from last week. And I said, in a play on the Washington Post's very clever slogan when Trump came to power, "Democracy dies in darkness," I said, Bezos is the darkness killing democracy now with the Washington Post. And I took Will Lewis, his Murdochian publisher, to task for his goodbye. So he fires 300 people and then he leaves. That's the most cowardly thing you can do. What he should have done is say, I can't do this, and not leave. We also saw he may have been paid $3 million for what?
A year, $300 million a year. Yes.
Wow.
No, that was his salary, but to leave also, I believe it was paid an extra $3 million.
Oh, okay.
So
Possibly.
whatever, it's all outrageous for what he has nothing to show for it. So I took his goodbye note and I just put quote marks on all the wrong places or all the right places, including support and leadership. And he said this institution could not have a better owner in Jeff Bezos, and I said he could have a better owner. And I said, instead of with gratitude, I changed that to with no shame, Will Lewis. And by the way, everyone, if you would please subscribe for free to Sree's Sunday Note. It's sreenet.substack.com. We would love for you to participate and be part of that community as well. This works really well with this show. The other person I want to mention is Matt Murray, who I admire as a journalist. He's done really good work at the Wall Street Journal, but he walked into a thankless situation, and I don't think he has handled the last few weeks as well as he could have and should have by going along with this whole charade. What he should have done is said, no, I'm going to step away. And he didn't do that. And there is a friend of ours named Peter Bhatia. Peter, longtime editor of the Oregonian, editor of the Cincinnati Inquirer, and editor of the Detroit Free Press, was asked to lay off people. And you know what he did? He went on and said, I'm laying myself off, and I'll save 4, 5, 6 jobs with that money. And that was the honorable thing to do. Most people would not do that. On the business side, you can say, well, Matt was in the room where it happened, so he could fix some things, but I have seen no proof of that. I've seen no proof that him and Will Lewis did the right thing at any point in recent weeks. And so I take no pleasure in naming names like that, but we have to be clear. 300 people lost their jobs, 300 people around the world at a time when Washington, as I said, the most important city in the world, needs the best coverage it can get. It's diminished. Its foreign coverage completely destroyed. It's the South Asia Bureau, led by Pranshu Verma, gone. A whole bunch of foreign bureaus completely removed. How? Why? At this time, for Washington, where people in Washington need to understand the world better than ever, they're understanding less than ever going forward. They also killed every photography job at the Washington Post at a time when photographs are going to matter even more than they do now. To be able to say, hey, I trust that photo because it's from a Washington Post photographer, outrageous that they took that off now. And that's the problem, that these firings, these layoffs were not clear. There's no strategy there. There's no business strategy there that makes any sense. A couple of more thoughts before I go back to you, Pradnya, and to you, Richard. Multiple people went to Will Lewis and to Bezos and said, we will buy the paper from you. We will take it and improve it. We will save the Washington Post. Most of them, if not all of them, didn't even get a reply. A couple of them went and said, let's give us the Washington Post sports section. Give us the local news. We'll fix it. We'll be custodians of it. And they did not even reply. Kara Swisher, the great tech reporter, tech journalist, former Washington Post correspondent and reporter, tried to buy the Washington Post, and she didn't even get a reply. These are the people running this very important institution. Some of you, I know, will be listening to me ranting like this and say, Sree, this is just one paper. So many papers have been lost. So many newspapers have died, and so many jobs have been lost. Yes, more than 30,000 journalism jobs have been lost in these 25 years, and hundreds of newspapers have closed. But this is a different paper with a different mandate, a different expectation, and a different standard. We are going to continue to support the folks who work there. I know Pradnya can tell us some very good folks who are still there, but we have to acknowledge it's diminished and it is not serving its purpose the way it should be. So thank you for letting me rant at that moment.
And actually, as actually technically still a Post employee, because they haven't actually given us any of our severance packages yet. They're still working out some of the terms, and I would give a shout out, even though I was management. I would like to give a shout out to the Guild because they are working on securing better terms for everybody. So yeah, I'm still actually getting my paycheck through the Washington Post, so I have to temper what I say. But
exactly.
as you can,
Pradnya, you're being brave to speak out. Speak up and speak out at this moment is not easy, because you want to work elsewhere, you want to have a career, and so I thank you for being able to speak. Richard and I can talk because we're not there.
Well, but I would also say, I think and one thing I did want to correct is it's actually way more than 300. I think the Guild has been trying to do a fair count, and it's probably close to 384. So that's 45% of the newsroom of the newsroom. So almost half the newsroom is going to be is basically gone. So it's much deeper than was previously advertised. So
can I just ask you to clarify, Sree, what should Matt Murray have done?
Well, he should have been much more explicit about what was going on internally. I'm not saying to me. Internally, there was a lot of darkness about what was happening. It wasn't clear what was going on. They didn't talk. I spoke to multiple people who said we were in the dark. We weren't being told what's happening. And I believe that he should not have stayed through all of this. There's no honor in staying if you're not doing the honorable thing once you're there. Yes, he gets credit for taking on, he was exposed by his boss, forced to be the face of this, and to have a Zoom call as the announcement. Everybody, as Pradnya can tell us, everyone is told to stay home and join on Zoom, and there comes Matt to say, you're all, who are all fired, whatever. It was just outrageous. That's the kind of the way where journalists should be doing things with more empathy, with more sympathy. These are their colleagues. There was one person who, I'm not going to mention him because I've not seen more about this, but there was at least one post, Pradnya will know about this, from somebody in the Post saying, yes, all these people are kind of whining about being laid off on LinkedIn, but you know what's not whining? The Washington. We're still here. We're going forward. This is not a journalist, but somebody works at the Washington.
Business, yeah, that was one of our high-ranking business side managers. Yes.
I mean, well, how can you be like that? We're not in the mining business. We're not in. I mean, all businesses should have higher standards, but not media should be held to the highest standard, Richard. So, but let me just.
Richard, I was going to say one other thing that happened around this time was the Millennium movie, and maybe you can.
Oh, yes.
Because $77 million basically lost. Maybe they made $9 million back, but Bezos spent about $40 million to buy the rights, and then reported another $40 million to promote the movie. Again, this was Amazon's money, and it's a publicly held company, and fully expecting to take a loss on it. But the thrust of it was he did all this to buy favor with the Trump administration, with Donald Trump specifically, since most of the money is going to his wife of the $40 million. So.
Yeah, and so just a couple of things on that. Thank you for pointing out the Millennium film. I'd rather not think about it, but that money, $70 million spent plus, outrageous. And that's just a bribe, a direct bribe to this presidency. Second, Hari Srinivasan and I both did some math. Hari is not related to me, but a good friend. You all know him from PBS. That this either represents the $100 million loss, either represents about $40 for an average American or a middle-class American, or $10. If I ran a business and $40 would save my business, I would reach into my pocket for that $40 multiple times, 10 times, so that I can save my business. And not just to save the business, to save the jobs of people in the business. This is not Wall Street. This is journalism. This is media. This is newsrooms with actual people living and working there. And that makes me even more mad about all of this and so disappointed in everything that's happened. But I have to get to, if you'll all please just wait to so that I can say hello to the folks who are watching. There's so many people watching and wanting to say hi. Another Pradnya in the DC area, Pradnya Haldipur, a longtime guest and friend of the show, is watching from Silver Spring, the heart of WAPO land. Ken Fisher is watching from Iowa. Thank you, Ken, for joining us early morning. Ron Thomas is here. You guys were my inspiration to start my own podcast. Thank you for the inspiration. We just won our first award last year for Top Podcast in Leadership. That's amazing. Ron Thomas, great friend, lives in Dubai and watches us wherever he's in the world. And his show on leadership is very important. Everybody should catch that. And Ron, I'm on my way to Dubai. One of these days I'll see you. And Deborah Kerr's watching from Fort Lauderdale, finally starting to warm up here. Iguana's not freezing any longer. That's why even in Florida, sometimes you find frozen iguanas. Looking forward to the show. Mary C. Curtis, great friend of the show. And Richard knows her, and so does Pradnya. Good morning from Charlotte. This week, heard from former Alabama Senator Doug Jones. He's running for governor, probably against Tommy Tuberville again. I asked him if he thought his state has changed, or I hope so. And Miriam Berkeley is watching from Hell's Kitchen. And Dan is watching from North Jersey. Thank you. We're seeing a lot of Valentine's Day greetings coming in. Amy's watching from Bellevue very early. That's Neil's sister. This is an example of how families can support one another, just watching the content people are creating. Diane's watching from a spin bike at the JCC in Margate, New Jersey. And what Paula is doing for us backstage is putting in links on the various platforms. We're live on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube. We're also live on scroll.in, which has 500,000 subscribers on YouTube, one of India's most important independent publications. Rose Horowitz is watching from a relatively balmy Connecticut. And Dan says, great book which helped explain what happened in Navalny is Red Notice. Worth the read to understand Russia. Thank you, Dan. That's really useful. Chris Gorman is watching from New York. He's with the Museum of the City of New York, and they have a fantastic new show. A guy made by hand reproductions of every major building in New York City, and he has put this at the museum. So everyone should go see it. I'm going to go see it, and I hope you will.
We did a show. We did a show from the museum before the pandemic. Stephen Kaplan was our guest in person. That was a great show.
And that's a great museum, and everyone should go. Mary says, so wonderful to see my hero, a longtime friend and colleague, Richard, but not on such an occasion. I think a lot of us feel that way. And here is Mr. Blues Radio, Neil. Mark Lee is saying, I remember those Milwaukee papers being a Marquette grad of 1980. For those of you who missed it earlier, Pradnya was saying that she was at the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel merger and jobs were lost in that process. Prabodh is watching and saying hello from Riverdale. And so many people, we can't get to all of them. Thank you. What makes this show different from every other podcast that you see is this chance for us to take questions, take your comments. So please post your questions and we will ask them of Richard as well as Pradnya. There is so much to talk about. Good morning from Reading, Connecticut. Neil, your thoughts, and then we'll do some more questions.
Absolutely. I think that, I don't think that, I can't think of another paper that really can stand next to the New York Times. They had very different focuses. I mean, there was, for living in Washington, D.C. now for, I moved back here. I'm trying to remember, 7 years ago. No, actually the house in 7 years, 2015 is when we moved back. And I had lived in D.C. before that for several years. We used to get both hard copies, the New York Times Daily and the Washington Post Daily, at our doorstep. I still remember when I picked up the paper and saw Monica Lewinsky on the front page above the fold and said, holy crap, this is going to be something. But I used to compare the coverage on a regular basis and look at what's on the front page of each paper, how much coverage are they giving to a particular story, et cetera. And we won't be able to do that. I don't know where else we'll be able to get that kind of coverage. Obviously, DC and politics was hometown news for the Washington Post. New York Times had a broader national view and a broader international view. But we've lost something very profound with the Washington Post. And I really wonder, I think there's a parallel, and I'm curious, Pradnya and Richard, I'd be curious to see what you think of this. We talk a lot about everything we've lost in the last year, in this first year of the second Trump presidency, our standing in the world, institutions like USAID, pulling out of WHO, all the stuff that RFK Jr. is doing. He was ripping apart our institutions in months, and it may take a generation to build that back. Is it even possible to build the Post back from where we are now if someone else comes in? If by some miracle Bezos decides to sell it, and someone with a growth mindset wants to rebuild the Washington Post, is that even possible? Well, Richard, I'm going to throw it to you first. Sorry.
Okay.
What do you think?
Well, I think that,
or Pradnya, we'll throw it to you first.
Okay. Yes, it is challenging in this news environment, but every cycle we've been through rebirths. During like I said, during 1995, everybody thought with all the newspapers closing, New York Newsday closing, Milwaukee Journal Sentinel merging, many other layoffs, that we would never grow again. The internet came along. I mean, the internet was around, but the explosion of the commercialization of the internet really made newspapers possible. At the same time, the commercialization of the internet did hurt certain aspects of the business. Craigslist basically destroyed, the classified ad business for the newspaper industry. But Craig invested in journalism. He's a big sponsor of the City University of New York, as you probably know, of its journalism program. And so, there have been reinventions in the industry. I don't have a great plan, otherwise I would try. But in 2013 or so, when Bezos bought the paper from the Graham family, it had already been diminished, over 10 years of, under Marty Baron and under Jeff Bezos' ownership. It did really grow and win many Pulitzers and did award-winning work. So, I don't know what the new generation is going to be like. The Baltimore Banner is actually trying to pick up some of the pieces that the Washington Post has left back.
Sports coverage, right?
Yeah, sports coverage. And also, I wanted to say the Metro, shout out to the Metro coverage. We used to have 70 people on the Metro local desk just 2 years ago, and it's down to 12 now. It's going to be, that's how can you cover an area the size of the DMV? Because this was, Metro, includes, the Virginia suburbs, includes the Maryland suburbs, includes, coverage of Baltimore to some extent, and Annapolis as well, right? And Richmond. So with 12 people, it's going to be very hard. The Baltimore Banner has already announced a Prince George's County bureau and a bureau in Montgomery County, where I live. So, the two big suburbs of Washington might, we'll see what, how they do and, how they build up, but it's going to be a process. And they are also announcing coverage into sports. As some people might know, the Baltimore Banner won a Pulitzer for its hard-hitting coverage of the Baltimore City Council. And I think it was a city council. It was an investigative award. But yeah, there was definitely, they can do hard-hitting work with a scrappy staff. So I'm cheering on the Washington Post too, and I'm cheering on what the people like the Baltimore Banner might do.
Of course.
Can I just say one thing about the sports? People who don't know, the Washington area loves sports.
Yeah.
They have two teams that have won major championships, including the Nationals and the Ravens, of course, and more importantly, the Commanders, and in baseball and football, and
ice hockey,
and ice hockey, and all of that, and that's all now gone. Why would you, if you were a business person, say we're going to take one of the most sports crazy places in the world and not serve them sports? One of the most important crime and news places in the world and not serve local news. Like, that's been every business decision that these guys have made, and that's why it is so frustrating to think of that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We have that was Pradnya Joshi, who's a national weekend editor at the Post, and we have Richard Prince back, who is a longtime columnist and a former staffer at the Washington Post many years ago. Richard, I want to throw that same question back to you. What I posed was, is it even conceivable that the Washington Post can build back up to what it was after these layoffs? I think Pradnya said it was almost 45% of the staff.
The newsroom.
What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts, Richard?
Okay. Well, I think that a lot of this has to do with business decisions. And the Washington Post has made the decision that it will be a global news product, not a local news product. And that's very important when you talk about building back up to what it used to be. Sometimes you can't go back. The Washington Post shrunk the Metro section, and now is part of Sports and Style in the back. And people they judge a news product by how it covers things they know about. And if you live in the area and you don't see the things that you think are important reflected, you're going to dismiss that news product. And so it will be very difficult for the Washington Post to build back its local allegiances because of this decision to go global and not local and not both. Now, there are financial reasons, business reasons for that. Number one, the classified ads, which used to be the bread and butter of newspapers, were eliminated by or drastically reduced when Craigslist came around in the 90s and early 2000s. Number two, the supermarket ads, which used to be full pages, Giant and Safeway in this area, are no longer. So the local news lost its financial backing. There was nobody paying for the local news specifically. And so therefore, the Post made the business decision, well, we're going to cut back on local news. We're going to go where the money is. And they decided that the money was going digital and trying to reach people around the world rather than people who live where they are. So there has to be either a creative financial way to make the local news pay for itself. I mean, people like to read, death notices and obits and what's going on in their neighborhoods. They used to have weekly sections for each jurisdiction in the area. Those are all gone. People who like politics, they should be happy, I suppose. And some people who like international news, that can be built back up. But as far as the people who live here, it's going to be difficult unless they make that financial commitment and raise enough money, perhaps, so that the finances are covering what they should be reporting to the local community.
Well, you might actually know this, but the Philadelphia Inquirer actually just recently announced that they're actually owned by a coalition and Linvest, yeah. But also I think there's a part ownership as well in the city. But it took a while, but they finally made a small profit, right?
Yes. And also, the New York Times also just announced that they have a record number of digital subscriptions.
But they're also global. They have gone global.
Yeah, they're global, but they also have good business management, and that's the difference between the Washington Post, and the New York Times, is they knew what they were doing.
Well, I was going to say yes, they did, and what happened also again in 2020, after the Great Recession, yes. The New York Times was in dire financial straits.
Yes.
They had to borrow money at very high interest rates from Carlos Slim, just to, make payroll. I was there at the time. And Arthur Sulzberger Jr., readily admitted it was a really, tough time, but they figured it out. They rebuilt over the years, I mean, some of it came with the Trump bump, but, they repositioned the newsroom, they repositioned globally. They really invested a lot in subscription and promotion to truly become a global brand over all these years. But yes, I mean, the New York Times itself went through some rough financial constraints in recent years.
And one other thing,
and that's the question.
One other important part is the ownership matters. The Sulzberger family is committed to journalism. Jeff Bezos is not. And when you talk about why doesn't Jeff Bezos do this or that, the other, some skeptics are saying, well, because he wants to please Trump. And by holding on to the Post and making the Post a major newspaper in the nation's capital, reflect Trump's point of view, which is practically what the new editorial page editor said, he is demonstrating with the daily news product that his fealty to Donald Trump. And that, to him, is more important than the journalism that's produced. So when you say, can we go back to the way things were, that's one basic thing that has to change.
Yeah, it might be, he might have to do more signaling. I mean, he all these years, he signaled that he didn't want to interfere with the news product. And he didn't step in when the Washington Post covered some of Amazon's, travails and, questionable practices. He's never interfered once. And Marty Barron said that in his book. To this day, I don't think I have seen him. I can say for sure, I haven't seen him interfere with the political coverage. Even though he might want to be seeming to please Donald Trump, he hasn't directed the politics and news department to cover any story in any specific way. But where we go from here is a question.
So you're saying as a weekend editor, you never got a phone call?
Never got a nope. Not even from Will Lewis. Yeah, not even from Will Lewis. And I was going to say one of the great things, one of the things they did try to preserve was, the great national security coverage. There's a big scoop at the top right here, and I really admire the national security team is part of national/politics. They covered this exclusive story about the Havana syndrome and some of the tests that are being done. And it feels like every day the national security team is breaking a huge story. Our military reporters were the ones that broke the story about the double tap, as they call it, and that was on the weekend of Thanksgiving weekend. I remember because I was sitting there in the hot seat. So they've been very tough on Pentagon coverage, and it's still a question about how is the United States military conducting itself in the Caribbean, in the Pacific? What are its priorities? Where is it going from here? And I think I do know the Washington Post national security team will continue to do an aggressive job in covering everything with the hard news lens. Otherwise, many of these reporters would leave. Like the bylines you see on the Havana syndrome story, Warren Strobel and Ellen Nagashima. Ellen has been there about 30 years, and she would not do something that would question her ethics, I think. So I would at least like to acknowledge that the reporters who are remaining there still believe in the fundamental values of the Washington Post.
Before we get to, sorry, Richard, just before we get to more viewer comments, I just want to note for folks who might just be joining us, this is a Washington Post tribute by the team that puts on Sree's Sunday New York Times read-along. It's a WAPO tribute. It would have been episode 387 of the New York Times read-along. Our guests are Pradnya Joshi, who's on the national desk at the Washington Post, and Richard Prince, a longtime media columnist and one-time Washington Post reporter and copy editor. We generally have been capping the show at an hour in the last several months. We will be going till 10 a.m. because there's just so much to cover, and we have so many comments from our viewers that we want to make sure that we get to as well. The question I wanted to ask earlier when we were talking about the building back of the Post is, would a nonprofit be an approach to support the Washington Post? It's had some luck. This is a quick Google search. The Salt Lake Tribune, the Philadelphia Inquirer, as we mentioned earlier, Tampa Bay Times, the Baltimore Banner, and you see some of the foundations that have supported this work as well. Do you think there's a future for a nonprofit to step in?
Well, I think that, of course there is, but you need to have a willing seller. And that's the big difference. That is the big difference. That's why these people who wanted to buy the Post didn't even get a response, because Bezos doesn't want to sell the Post. He wants to have that as something he can show Donald Trump. And it's true that the news side has not been touched as much as the editorial pages, but the editorial pages are something that apparently that Trump cares very much about, and so does Bezos.
I think Richard has made this point a couple of times, and it's so important. If you remove 300 reporters from covering Washington and its aftermath of Washington, that's a good thing for Trump. If you decimate the universities, that's a good thing for Trump. If you decimate the law firms, that's a good thing for Trump. So this is all based, and I want everyone to remember this, on a 1.5% margin victory of an election in November 2024. Not even 50% of the vote did he get, but he has seized a mandate as if he was Ronald Reagan winning 49 states. And as a result of that, we are in this situation. And those of us who were warning people about where we go with all of this, even we were underestimating the damage that's being done in government, and we need watchdogs. I'll also point out that a judge said this week that ICE has violated more judicial directives in January than many federal agencies in their entire existence. And who better to cover that than the Washington Post? And I loved Pradnya pointing out the exclusives, the scoops that the Washington Post has been still giving us. Even today, Richard was pointing out an important story on the front page. That's what we need. And half the paper is gone, but the half that remains. And by the way, Richard, back to you on this point of global. They want to go global, but we don't want to have global bureaus. Then what's global about it? At least the New York Times is hiring people all over the world. One more thing before I throw it to Neil. In 1948, the Baltimore Sun won a Pulitzer Prize for its coverage of India's first year of independence. The Baltimore Sun. That's how papers used to be. And then they retreated in various ways, and Baltimore Sun went back to being what it was, and a very solid regional newspaper for decades. And now the Banner is doing great work. And I hate to think that the Washington Post now will be like that, a publication that led the world in news coverage in so many areas, and now a shell of itself. Neil.
Yeah, I think a shell of its former self is exactly what we're going to see. I want to, Sree, make sure that we get in some of the viewer comments that are coming in, and we have a number of people who are watching. Mark Lee, who you saw earlier, I'm sure that NABJ will be all over on top of this issue in terms of the cuts, and a few other. Let's see who else is commenting. Maddie Reynolds made a comment about the newspaper. Really said people love Don Lemon. He says nobody likes Don Lemon, doesn't do anything. Again, that's one of the things that we understand when we do a show like this. We're not in a bubble. Right? We will get comments from all sorts, and we will disagree with comments of all sorts. Maddie Reynolds, I think you're completely wrong, but that's okay. You're allowed to have your opinion. This is America. We just don't have to always show it. Another user says the media should be independent. Absolutely agree with that. Let's see who else is watching.
Elise Yoon was on. I saw it earlier.
Yes, we had a comment from Elise earlier.
We can get back to that later, but go ahead on this one.
Yeah. Molly Raskin says, good morning from New York City. Freelance journalist here. Grew up with the Washington Post. Landed my first ever byline in the paper. Heartbroken by what Bezos has done, but know the legacy of the Post will live on, and grateful to all the incredible talent there is. Absolutely. Let's see who else. Linda Lawrence is watching from Pennsylvania, Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Thank you. Sujana Chandrasekhar says, I've always held journalism in such high position. The Washington Post debacle hurts that much more. It hurts. I think that's a great way of putting it.
ENT surgeon, not a journalist, an ENT surgeon. We forget when in our journalism world that this newspaper and media and the work we do affects so many lives. Everyday people who read, or very involved folks who do their own media content, someone like Dr. Sujana Chandrasekhar as well. Dr. Tachi says when it comes to endangering the livelihoods of masses of people in this way, names need to be named. I think she was talking about my naming some of the folks who I consider problematic in this situation. And by the way, just to imagine all of this is happening while the Epstein files are breaking world news every day. Miriam says, democracy dies in darkness. It seems pretty clear they want people to be uninformed. This administration definitely does. And we know Jeff Bezos is in cahoots in so many ways, including what we talked about earlier, the $40 to $70 million bribe. And I remember when the tan suit that President Obama wore was a national scandal that we may not have recovered from at the time. Ellen says, yes, just one more paper, but an important one. Or a formerly important one. Sudha says Washington Post has very good image internationally, and the massive layoffs are terrible. Our support to the employees. Thank you. It's absolutely.
I want to do a shout out again to the Washington Post Guild, how important that unions are in this equation, and the union was certainly hit hard. And I say this in particular because my mom, who's watching, Sudha Parekh, is a longtime union member. 1199 in New York, and I had the pleasure of working with a union in Washington State, SEIU 775. So we are a union family, and we supported the New York Times reporters when they were striking and taking action against the Times, and we'll support the Washington Post Guild as well. Paula shared a link to Journalisms, Richard's webpage, so thank you, Paula. Patricia says, love that title, Journalisms. So that's great as well. Let's see what else. So I was going to just
do a shout out to Elise. She was one of our editors. Elise Yoon was on. Commented earlier. She was on in our Seoul bureau, and the Seoul bureau wasn't. There she is. Hi. The Seoul bureau didn't cover news about Korea or the area because that was a different bureau. We had a separate bureau, but the Seoul was actually a hub. And they basically took handoffs from me on the weekends to continue covering whatever the day's news was, whether it was, Trump's latest threats on Greenland or something going on in Ukraine or covering, the 24/7 news cycle. They were very integral to covering some Hamas attacks of in October 2023. They were so integral to getting things started. They know how to start our live coverage. They'll get stories started, and they were very small but mighty, and they punched above their weight. And Bart Shainman wrote a tribute on Substack in the Republic of Letters, if you want to read that at some point. But yes, and Elise is one of the people who worked in the Seoul hub. And the London hub is still around, but it's I think been kind of cut in about half in terms of its staff. So yeah, the Seoul hub would hand off to London, and then London would hand off to Washington, and this is how we kept the 24/7 news cycle going on major news stories. So.
Elise, thanks for all you're doing, and thanks for watching. And Rose is a great family friend. And just delighted that she's watching. Alilia is watching. Alilia Bundles, who Richard definitely knows, a legend in journalism circles, and former trustee of Columbia University itself, and author of the definitive book on the life of Madam C.J. Walker, the first Black American millionaire. I believe that's the right title for Madam C.J. Walker.
For all the folks who are joining us for the first time, Sree and I host this show every Sunday. It's usually a Sunday New York Times read-along. We review the paper, take audience comments, and delve into the coverage. But today, and Sree's kind of showing the print edition of the paper. We've been doing this for 10 years, but today is a special Washington Post tribute with our guests Pradnya Joshi and Richard Prince. So if you're interested, please drop me an email, neil@digimentors.group, and we can add you to our mailing list so you get notifications for upcoming shows. And I'll put that on the screen for you so you can find my email address. And Paula will add that in the comments as well. Deborah is watching from Arlington, Virginia, Washington Post territory. Absolutely. Deborah is a neighbor of mine, effectively. I'm also in Washington, D.C. And Jonathan has a comment, or John, rather. For decades, the Post was for political junkies and Beltway insiders by reputation. And, of course, the Wall Street Journal was for financial point of view. Over the past couple of decades, that has changed. Only the Times remains. Interesting. Only the Times remains. I do have a comment from Instagram that I'd like to read out from our good friend Walter Grayson. He says, can veteran journalists mentor younger writers to create more independent journalism platforms? What do you think about that? Richard, we'll start with you. Can veteran journalists mentor younger journalists to create more independent platforms?
They're already doing that. Substack has become very popular. People are writing now. I mean, we have so many outlets now for people who want to write. People are writing on LinkedIn. They're writing on Facebook.
Shout out to Gabe Fleischer. Do you read Gabe Fleischer's newsletter? He was like, he writes about politics very much, but not just Donald Trump, but what's happening in Congress. And tries to explain it, like especially a lot of the parliamentary procedures and things like that. So a shout out to Gabe Fleischer. If he started his newsletter when he was like 14 or something like that, in living in St. Louis, and then he came to, and I actually subscribed to him, and he's continued growing, and he's he admires many journalists in Washington. Many journalists in Washington admire him covering politics. But he's sort of reaching out to the young people. Then he graduated from. I wanted to say he came to Georgetown University, graduated from Georgetown and stayed in Washington. So that's why I think he's very much. I feel like he's part of the Washington fabric and is one of the young people starting his own independent, ways of covering the news. And
and don't forget the journalism organizations, because they are very important in that. And what our caller said, they do have mentorship programs where the younger people can learn from the older people, and that's why those organizations are so important.
Actually, somebody just put up about the Minnesota Star Tribune.
Yes,
that definitely give a shout out. Definitely, they've been punching above their weight in covering everything that's been going on with the immigration raids. So
that comment is from our friend Walter Grayson, watching on LinkedIn. Occasionally, we don't see the picture and the name, but I know Walter very well. I know that's his comment. He was the one that asked about mentorship as well. In terms of the international perspective, again, we are on Scroll. We're producing the show in partnership with Scroll.in, one of India's most important independent websites. And we have a user watching from Punjab, India, saying newspapers have become less relevant, but news is still relevant. And for the dissemination of news, focus should be on the website and apps and blogs, etc. So we also think about how that gets diversified. Sree thinks that's funny, I guess, or
no, I just wanted to say, because here I am. Look at this. This is just one page newspaper. So we've been told by people, why are you so obsessed with the print paper? They're killing trees. They're driving fuel, expending fuel to get to people. You should move on. And that's hilarious because I'm the Mr. Digital allegedly. But there's something special, and I think each of us, I hope before we wind up, we have about another 10 minutes. Before we go, I'd like to ask each of you to kind of reflect on what print means to you. And if you remember your first print thing you wrote, I remember I was 16 when I got my first byline at the Fiji Sun, which has a great tagline: the first newspaper published in the world today. Not the oldest, but the first, because they're right next to that date line. So in Fiji, there's a place you can go where it says yesterday, tomorrow. You can just jump back and forth. But what I learned at the Fiji Sun, working there and seeing my name in a newspaper, it was a tabloid. I mean, I'll never forget that feeling, and that's why I still do this. Neil has told the story many, many times. Why he does this with me every Sunday is because his father, who ran a Indian American newspaper and was a lawyer and great community leader, when he passed, he asked, oh my God, every time I say this, Neil, I get goosebumps. He asked that the Sunday New York Times be in his casket with him when he was cremated. Like I mean, I've said this so many times, Neil, but I still, think of your dad, who was a mentor to me and a great supporter of SAJA, the South Asian journalists, where, by the way, we've tracked more than, I think, Pradnya, about 15 to 17 journalists have lost their jobs.
South Asian? Yeah, South Asian.
Sorry, I meant South Asian journalists.
South Asian journalists at the Washington Post, yes.
Yeah, the Washington Post. So anyway, just to say, that's why we do this. We, of course, also look at digital stuff, and Neil is very good at that. But there's still something magical about this. It had been predicted that the last newspaper would disappear by 2025. The printed newspaper would disappear, but it's still here. And I like to share the story of, you've all seen the famous all the news that's fit to print ear that they call it in the New York Times. It's still there, even though it's digital. And I worked at the New York Times one summer when they were working on a project to kind of rename that. Like, they did a contest, a call for what should the digital edition be called? What should their slogan be? And they decided to stick with all the news that's fit to print, even though this was 97, 98, when those big, let's go to the future. But the future, it turned out, is still print. It's diminished in so many ways all around the world. But there's nothing like going to India and getting in your hotel room, as Neil and I did, 7 to 8 newspapers on a daily basis. It's an incredible thing to see. Neil, your thoughts?
We have been doing this show together for a number of years, Sree. I still remember, and I wasn't there for the first episode, but you were experimenting with Facebook Live. You were at Columbia J School and said, let's see how this thing, Facebook Live, works. You dropped a paper on the table, aimed your phone at it, and started this global conversation. But the word that we always use when talking about reviewing the print edition is serendipity. We found articles that we wouldn't have found otherwise because we're looking at the print edition. I know for myself, I spend most of the week looking at the app on my phone. And I go to my sections, I see what they're serving up in terms of the algorithm, etc. But I focus on sports and the book review, some of the international stuff. Sree is holding up an article right now. Songs will play on ice if skaters got the rights. About the controversy around copyright issues for the ice dancers. But we come across articles in the Sunday paper that we never would have seen otherwise. And that's what's important about print. This article, married financial planners can make tax errors too. That's not something I would have read. Or the different sections. The New York Times Magazine may or may not come across your
that might
your
be
screen.
something that Jeff Bezos wants to read.
Deep Freeze heats up an old yacht rivalry. Absolutely. So I think that's an important point about print in terms of seeing kind of the impact of it. One of the comments we got, John Lee is asking, is there a preferred channel for you for the audience leaving comments? So we talk about the production of the show occasionally. We are live on several channels at the same time: Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, our Digimentor's website. And John, I would say that for showing the comment on the screen, Facebook, YouTube are probably the best places. LinkedIn is good as well. But as you've seen, sometimes we don't see the name and picture. Instagram, we can't put on the screen as easy, so I have to turn off camera, and I hate doing that, but I have to turn to my side to look at the screen and read off the comment. Twitter, if you reply to the tweet, we have to read it out. Sometimes we'll show on the on screen, but with Twitter, you can click on the video and watch. I will make a quick comment about Twitter. They've changed the way they show live stream videos just in the last week. Last Sunday, it wasn't an issue. Now, for several years, not the full 10 years, we've been live on Sree's Twitter account Sunday mornings, and they will create a post with the video that you can find in his timeline. They don't do that anymore. They put a little live icon on his profile picture, and you have to click on that, or you have to click on the sidebar where it says like videos that are playing. So it makes it a little bit harder to find it on Twitter. But John, for your question, Facebook and Facebook is also where most people watch the show. So if you want to watch it in community, I would go to Facebook. Some people like putting YouTube on their TV and watching and doing comments on their phone. Just so we have another comment.
Yeah, we've really built a community over these years. And Neil, thank you for your leadership in this.
Yes.
And we want to just remind everybody, we're here every Sunday, so 8:30 to 9:30. Please join us. And we would love to have you sign up for our mailing list. It's just once a week. Neil will tell you who's our guest, what are we covering, what are the news things. And often we have world exclusives of PDFs from the New York Times, which editors send us. And they're not available anywhere else except on our website. So if you go to digimentors.group and kind of scroll through some of the episodes, like the 52 places to go or the cooking PDFs, which are the print sections are available to subscribe, but in the gatefolds, things like that. So please look for that. We just have a few more minutes. I want to read some comments. Here's, I'm 90s born. I like Sudoku, sports section, and international news in the newspaper. Isn't that nice?
And actually, that's a good point. I wanted to say about the newspaper is the sports section is often where young people would start reading the printed section because they wanted to see their high school teams or their college teams and see what the results were. And the killing of the sports section is sort of like your own goal, as the people in soccer would say, because you're basically turning off all these potential future readers, and that was often an entree into the newspaper. Maybe not the paper itself, but news, finding out what the news is, because people were so mad about sports around here. The high school all met section used to be very popular in print. That's going to be killed, but they are actually revived. The people who did it are partnering with another organization and reviving it separately off platform. But that was one of the things, like, why would you kill this thing that everybody in the DMV read who was into what's going on with high school sports? Oh, Doreen is here. She is one of our editors who was also let go. But hello, Doreen. Thank you.
Doreen, thank you for watching. We send our love to you and everybody who's affected. And I want to remind people, it's not 300 people who lost their jobs, even if it's 300-400. It's the ripple effect, their families, then the grocery store, the dry cleaner, all get affected by layoffs. Not just this story, but every story you read. You know what happens on Wall Street. 10,000 jobs lost at Sears means the stock price goes up. That's how disconnected we've become with these numbers and what they mean to humanity and to lives. And so that's important. We have just a couple of minutes left. We want to get in some more comments, including a question that I want to have us answer before we leave. Molly Raskin asks, would love to know what the incredibly talented journalists who are laid off are planning to do next. Would they consider banding together in some way? Who in the news is hiring right now? Would we need journalists more than ever? Why can't someone with money create a new home for them? And I will have everyone answer this. Also, my question about print before, your first print byline. And there's just so much to talk about, but I will just say that Richard pointed out that just because we think something is a good idea and rich people should invest in it, that's not how it works. Rich people, very, very rich people I'm talking about, all have agendas, plans. They have kids who get involved, right? So I often think of my grandfather, who grew up in a house with mud walls as my dad did, and a thatched roof, and no electricity, no indoor plumbing. When he would walk on the streets of India, in Kerala, in the village, he would see a car go by, and he says, how come this car doesn't pick us up? And he said, one day, if I have a car, I will pick up everybody along the way and give them a free ride to wherever they're going. Sure enough, 70 years later, 60 years later, the family bought him a car. How many people do you think he picked up along the way and gave free rides to? Not any, right? So, so rich people have their own plans, and while we can appeal, and we can do things, there's still a long way to go to convincing them. They have to think of this as business and strategy. The sad part about this is Mr. Bezos did all of that in 2013 and spent the $250 million, lost hundreds of millions of dollars. That's fine, but he decided it's more than the money. It's the alignment that has happened in the realignment that's happened in Washington, that he wants to be on that side of it. So before
I was going to say quickly on what kind of news ownership can we do? We can do another whole segment on it. Rod Benson, NYU sociologist, has a book studying media ownership and the different ways it has effects on news coverage. And just wanted to, I was on it in another seminar earlier last week, where he talked about the different things. And I posed this exact question to him that the person said, it's like, if we could ever get Bezos to sell, in this fantasy, what kind of, structure should we set? And I believe his answer was something like the Linfest Institute. Maybe we could do it like the way that the Philadelphia Inquirer is doing it.
Thank you. So we're just going to wrap up here because it's almost time. Paula is pointing out that we want to make sure viewers know about two GoFundMe options. One is for U.S. domestic employees organized by the Post Guild, and the other is for international employees who don't have the same protection. So if you go to GoFundMe, I'm sure they're there. I'm sure they're very popular, and they've raised Pradnya, hundreds of thousands of dollars for them. If they're not, we should continue to support them, even if they have, because that's important.
Yeah,
so
especially for the international employees.
Yeah, thank you. Before we give Richard and Pradnya a final give them a chance to give us some thoughts, Neil, we have to do some housekeeping, including the very important show you did for us just this past week.
Thank you, Sree. I just want to let folks know, and people who are familiar with the show will know that I also produce a show 2 times a month called Shining Light on Shadows, a candid conversation about mental health. Last week, we did a very special show on Black mental health, trauma, and its impacts across the lifespan. Dr. Michael Kane, who is a clinical traumatologist, was our guest. I am proud to say he was my therapist when I lived in Seattle for almost 10 years. And this is something that I never would have talked about in public, that I saw a therapist or that I had suffered from anxiety and occasional depression, more recently diagnosed with ADHD. But over the last 2 years, this is our 3rd year of the show, talking about mental health, talking about these issues openly and honestly has been so important. And I'm so proud of the conversation we had. Not only did we focus on Black mental health, but about trauma and how people process trauma regardless of their background. So you can find that on my website, neilparekh.org. If you go there, again, neilparekh.org, and that's the show, the ticker at the bottom, trauma and its impacts across the lifespan, focusing on Black mental health, but also so much more. So thank you, Sree, for all the support I've gotten from Digimentors and Digimentors colleagues to produce that show. It's been very meaningful. I want to make sure.
Neil,
thank you.
I always say, Neil, that there's not enough discussion about mental health by men, by South Asian men, and South Asians in general. So you're like a trifecta there. Richard will also tell you that it's the same issue in the Black community, Hispanic community, minorities, people of color don't talk about mental health enough, and you're leading the way, and you have for multiple years. And I know you would never have imagined that one day you would be talking about even having therapy, let alone putting a therapist on the on screen. I did wonder if HIPAA applies once you put them on the air. But that's a conversation for another time. So what I'd like to do now is just to have everybody say goodbye with some final thoughts, and Neil will take us out. But let's start with Pradnya. Thank you, Pradnya, for joining us. It's very meaningful to us that you could be here, the weekend editor of the Washington Post, even now, but you're able to join us in these very sad circumstances. You've been a leader in the field, 30 years. We all started together, and I've been so proud of everything you've done for journalism, to helping journalists, fellow journalists, people of color, your leadership in AAJA. All of it means so much to me personally and to everyone in AAJA, SAJA, and beyond. And to be the weekend editor of the Washington Post, I mean, that title itself is so important and shows the value that you brought every day and every weekend to the Washington Post. And I'm sure a lot of sacrifice by your family to have you missing from Friday night to Monday morning or whatever the right thing is. So over to you, Pradnya. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Sree. And thank you so much for all the support you've given. I mean, the institutions, like Saja, if they had never been there, I know it would have been such a much harder journey, because it feels so lonely. And I was going to say, that's one of the things about technology now, is that you can bring people together. And the Washington Post alumni have been supporting each other online through different channels. And that's made it so much easier dealing with this trauma layoffs. But yes, thank you so much for doing this. Please, everybody, thank you for your support of news organization, for covering the news. We do need accurate, important, urgent coverage to continue keeping democracy alive. So please, encourage that. My family sometimes was like, what are you doing at 10 p.m. when Trump is tweeting about Greenland or something? But yes, there was often many, many nights. And in fact, like one of the last weekends is when he said he was going to close down the Kennedy Center, and the arts section was in the middle of its Grammy coverage, so we had to like scramble. That was like that happened like at 7 p.m. on a Sunday, so that was supposed to be almost the end of my work week, but didn't quite end up that way. But we got that story started, and I think that I believe the Post has done an incredible job of what's happened with arts coverage under the Trump administration. So I would like to see some of that continue. And like I said, my almost 18-year-old son is one of the few readers of print. He actually loves reading the print, and he doesn't let me throw away the Sunday papers for a week. I mean, I had to finally say we have to make a decision because we're becoming hoarders here. But yes, he is one of the few people who does like to read in print and in apps and in other ways. But yeah, I'm hoping the new generation will help us. And all of you out there, don't give up hope. Do support ways. Do support the news and do support journalists as much as you can.
Last thought before you go, your first print byline.
My first print byline. Oh, I don't think I actually remember it, but I do remember one of my early bylines in the Saginaw News, which was one of the first front page articles I had about this. As an intern, I was working there, and this was the first Iraq War, and this I think he was a Marine. He had come back, and his wife had done all of these, tried to save up all the holidays, so all the Valentine's gifts and all of the, birthday gifts and everything. And so when he was finally back, they had the Christmas tree up, even though it was like, April, I think, because that was the month of my internship. And, as like his wife had, saved all of these memories. And so today is Christmas, I think was my lead. And so I just remember being on the front page with that story. So.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you, Pradnya. Richard, over to you, your final thoughts and your first byline.
Okay. Well, when you were talking about the story about your granddad and not picking up people, it brought to mind a recent story that was on the CBS Evening News, I believe, where the bus driver was giving free rides to kids who couldn't afford it, and they made him stop. So he got his own bus, and he continued giving people free rides to school. And those are the kind of uplifting stories that I like to see, and I think that the news media should be doing, and some are doing very well. They impart values, and that's something that shouldn't be forgotten, especially in the time we're living in now, when we have such, as President Obama was saying just yesterday, we have such poor examples of proper values being transmitted every day. So that's one thing I'll say about the need for the news media and newspapers in particular. Give us something we can say, yes, there are good people in the world, and they are doing some good things, and these are people I should emulate. As for the first byline, it's hard to go back that far. I do remember when I first got to the Washington Post, they had a news service, the Washington Post LA Times news service. And my first story, I think one of my first stories there at the Post was about a group called Boys Nation, where people, it's like the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, and they all got together in Washington. And they said, well, this is of national interest. And they put it on the news service. And I was really thrilled. Here I am, a cub reporter, and people reading my stuff all around the country.
Thank you, Richard. Before you go, Patricia loves your story about spreading kindness. So thank you for that. And the way I pay tribute to Pradnya, I want to do to you as well, to say thank you for decades of focusing on the media itself, for being a media critic, for being a media supporter. I like to say I'm a tech evangelist and critic and skeptic, evangelist and skeptic. I think you're the same way when it comes to media. You're a leader in our field. Journalisms is something everyone should subscribe to. Go to journalisms with the hyphen. By the way, I think it's the only URL I've ever seen, Neil, with a hyphen in it. And you'll learn so much. He did an incredibly important round table about Minneapolis that you can find the recording of. Everything Richard does is inclusive, bringing people together. He gives people a voice. These are all values that are now subsided and diminished in Washington. And Richard has been a friend and advisor and mentor to so many of us. Thank you, Richard, for all you've done. I appreciate you. And final words to Neil Parekh. We'll get some more comments coming in here, including Patricia, who saves all the magazines, and we have a thank you all. And Elise is dropping that article that was mentioned by Pradnya. And by the way, so many big news items happen on weekends. They used to not happen. There was a Friday news drop. That's all gone now. Some of the biggest stories drop on weekends, and that's really important. And over to you, Neil. Thank you, everybody, for watching. We'll see you next Sunday, everybody. Neil, to you.
Thank you. I just want to remind folks that when we're done, in case you joined us late in the middle of the show, as soon as we're done, you'll be able to watch from the beginning on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on YouTube, and on our Digimentors website. Instagram works a little bit differently, unfortunately, so you have to come to one of those other platforms. But it was a fascinating discussion with Richard Prince and Pradnya Joshi, a tribute to the Washington Post after the mass layoffs that were announced just about 2 weeks ago. There's Pradnya holding up that Washington Post.
Oh.
Absolutely.
Richard, you can hold it
He's
up.
also going to hold up his paper. It's going to be great. Okay, here we go.
There we go. Let's get both of them on screen, and we show that Washington Post. Mark Lee says, "Great show, thank you, Mark." And we have a couple other. Jonathan said, "Fascinating." Oops, it moved up. Fascinating show or tribute. Thank you. And I wanted to point out, Lippy says that she was in the Netherlands and Italy for the past 2 weeks for the Olympics, as Richard is showing. And so many asked what's happening in the U.S. They're interested in what's going on. And there's speed skating. My mom shared that her hometown newspaper in India, in Jamnagar, not a big city, although Reliance has made it a big city over the last 40 years or so. They mentioned the massive layoffs in the Washington Post in their local paper, which I thought was interesting. And Jonathan said he's going to share the GoFundMe links to his timelines. So thank you, Jonathan. Dana Conroy says, fantastic to talk about mental health. Thank you, Dana. Appreciate that. One last, I think those are all the comments. There's one longer comment.
I'll just read it. Michael says that serendipity about newsprint is something I tell young people and my students. Also, Sree, like you, my first non-school publication, Byline, was also at 16, part of a teenage program at the Asbury Park Press.
All right.
Back in the 1980s. Unfortunately, as a freelancer, I see that paltry $25 payment decades later is something that was offered, and there's a lot less money now than in 1984. Thank you, everybody, for watching. We have to say goodbye, and we have to let our friends get on with their weekend.
We've gone to 10:15.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
We'll ask Richard and Pradnya to stay in the studio when we go off the air. Thank you, and we'll see you next week.